Do you know this guy? He is Tim MacMahon,
Hey,
not McMahon. From ESPN, the Hoop Collective podcast. Love the Hoop Collective podcast.
this song sounds different at one time speed.
Yeah, it's like, this is like the original song, wherever it came from. I can't remember what it was called. What's it called, Tim? Is this you guys playing? Like you got the stand-up bass?
Yeah.
Bon Tips is a bass guy. Just carry the groove.
Howdy, partners.
Howdy,
You know what, though?
indeed.
The theme song that has been ironically banned was that is Tom Haberstroh, who is playing his guitar and singing the band MacMahon theme song that unfortunately you haven't heard in a while. But no, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I'm a little bit distracted. I'm filing just a quick little news story. I'm sure you guys are excited. Not only is Anthony Davis practicing with the Texas Legends today, but Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively II joining him. The injury-riddled Mavs might be getting their three bigs back relatively soon here. I know you guys are fired up about that.
Well, obviously you say that in jest, but I do wonder what the detonation point is here. Like the situation the organization is in, to me, is it worth bringing guys back if the risk is minimal just to give the fan base something? I just don't know how they can confirm with three big men who are coming off injuries if a week's worth of it is a low enough risk to be worth that for the franchise.
Well, there's a few things at play here. I think first and foremost is they want to play. In particular, Anthony Davis really wants to come back. There are people who have tried to say, AD, like the risk reward's not here, bud. Like, just take it easy. And he's like, no, I want to come back. I want to play. I mean, think about it. What has he been hearing for, the last, whatever it's been, 6-7 weeks? What a terrible deal the Mavs made. It's like, this is a top 75 all-time player who's an afterthought, the most shocking trade in NBA history, and was brilliant for 31 minutes until he went down. He wants to come back. He wants to get on the floor. And, I think you kind of have to respect his wishes. And then there's, they're not going to, if, especially with Lively, if there's risk of re-injuring that thing, they're not going to put him at that kind of a risk. But could there be some benefit in those guys getting a little bit of playing time together, getting some minutes, being able to establish even just a little bit of chemistry? Could there be some benefit going into next year? You can talk me into that, but let's be honest, you guys don't want to talk about the last week of this season or the last 2 weeks or whatever it's going to be.
All things Mavs just make me sad. I just
Sorry to hear that.
don't care at all, and it's really weird. Like, I have just the most indifference I've ever had towards anything in sports about the current Mavs team, ownership, whole franchise. If they were to fold tomorrow, I'd be like, all right, I don't know.
Aren't you a Cleveland Browns fan?
I am, and that's I mean, that you would think gave me a nice callus, but that's the one comp that I had to the way I was feeling February 2nd or 3rd or whatever that whole thing is. The only comparable thing I could think of was taking a whole franchise away, because that's basically what they did. And I'm still struggling to cope with it all. Seriously.
Listen, I think, honestly, as much as anybody, I understood the level of frustration that there was within the Mavericks organization, and frankly, especially with Nico Harrison, regarding Luka Doncic. And I was just completely flabbergasted that they traded him. Just because I get it, the conditioning concerns and the weight fluctuations, and hey, is his body going to hold up? Okay. 5-time first-team All-NBA selection at the age of 25, who is in the process of closing on his forever home, is eagerly looking forward to that day in early August when he can sign the largest contract in NBA history and be committed long-term to the Mavericks. And you are fresh off a finals run when the dude averaged 34, 10, and 9 last year, and then led the NBA in playoff points, rebounds, assists, steals. Never been done before. Does Luka have flaws? Yes. And his flaws are almost as obvious as his talent. We all understand that. But the production had far, far outweighed the pain in the ass factor. But it was, I think, a decision that could be accurately described as hasty. The concerns are what they are. I do think the fraying of the relationships, especially the Nico Luca relationship, did play a factor into this. And it's a hell of a story. Had a sad ending for the Mavericks. Or
Yeah,
I'm
so we
sorry,
don't.
sad ending for Mavericks fans.
Yeah, not the Mavericks yet. Give that 3 or 4 years, and we'll check in on how the market is feeling when they're doing process Southwest. But I think it's fascinating the reaction to me that you've got. And now that I've read the book, the way I feel about this and fans just taking shots at you and going after you is you're you're telling a story, and as part of telling that story, you're telling sides of a story. And so when you say something like, or privately or internally, Doncic's conditioning had become a problem for the Mavericks. That's not you saying you have a problem with Luka's conditioning. That's you reporting that, hey, this is what people are talking about within the organization. And I think it's tricky when people are emotional for them to fully understand that. But I think that's the proper way to explain. It's not you saying this is a problem. It's you saying for the Mavericks right now, it's a problem. And I think it's fascinating that you, knowing all of that and reporting the book on it, you knew about the frayed relationship. You knew
Mhm.
about the concerns. You were still shocked.
Yeah.
To me, the guy who literally wrote the book on the relationship saying, "Whoa, no, but we're not there yet." That to me, you're an authority on this matter, and I think that speaks volumes. It's not just all of us out here who just watch the games.
Yeah. And look, there are a lot of layers here. And honestly, like, was my relationship, like with Luca, was my relationship a friendly, warm, fuzzy relationship? No. Were there some, there were times he very publicly called me out. And I stand by all my reporting throughout the course of his career. I stand by all my reporting in the book, but it's not always like comfortable, right? And, for example, he called me out the at his exit interview in the tank here. I had just reported that, hey, the fear within the organization is if there's not a drastic turnaround next season, that Luka Doncic could ask out as soon as the summer of 2024. Now, he was like, I never said that. And he's 100% right there. He never said that. He never threatened. He never, as far as I know, even implied. But the fear within the organization was that. And it is a common sense fear, right? You're talking about this guy was an MVP candidate whose team had to tank to keep a top 10 protected pick. That's after completely bungling the Brunson situation. And then at that point, like, dude, we didn't know what was going to happen with Kyrie in free agency. Could you imagine if Kyrie, say the Lakers went after him and Kyrie decided to go join LeBron in LA and Lucas sitting here holding a bag of crap? The fear was an appropriate fear, but he didn't like that. I honestly, he didn't like when I reported that for the first time in his career, just before that Kyrie trade, that he was pushing the organization, pushing the front office to make upgrades. Okay, it was true. And it's not my job to be liked. It's my job to report accurate information. And then the condition concerns, had I reported on that stuff throughout the course of his career? Absolutely. Was it fair? Was it accurate? Was it in the proper context? Did I look for every chance to report on it? No. Trust me, I've been very, very selective on these things. Um, but people being mad, okay. Like, my reporting has been confirmed in the most stunning way possible. I don't know what you want me to do. It's not my job to like soothe the feelings of people who are pissed off. It's my job to report what the hell happened. And if you want to blame the messenger, that's fine. I don't care. And if you don't want to buy the book, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness, available on everywhere you can get books now, published in bookstores on Tuesday. Thanks for the opportunity to plug that bad boy. If you don't want to buy it, okay. What I love is people who are like, this book sucks. I'm like, you haven't read a word. So it's probably, it's like me not watching a game and say, oh, that guy sucks. But again, the reaction of the angry internet mob, you just got to kind of keep it moving with all that stuff. And my relationship with Luca is what it is. Like I'm not. It's funny. I was actually talking to Dorian Finney-Smith. Uh, everybody loves Dodo. Obviously, one of Luca's favorite teammates with the Mavericks. Was a great trade for the Lakers just before they traded for Luca. Has been a huge part of the Lakers' defensive turnaround. Anyways, Dodo's just one of the best dudes in the world. And when I see him, he'll always come over and chat. And we're standing on the sideline. This was February 27th. I stayed in LA after the Mavericks played, and they're about to play the Wolves. And Luca's going through his pregame warm up, and Do's like, "Hey, man, you and L going to be all right?" I'm like, "I got no beef. Like, we're fine." It's like, no, all this stuff. He's a little mad at you. I'm like, "Well, that's okay." I'm like, "Do, like, I didn't trade the guy. They didn't ask my advice. I assure you of that. I wouldn't have pulled the trigger on this trade, but they made the trade. I've got a report on why the hell they just made the most shocking trade in NBA history. Like, what the reason is." He's like, "Yeah." And then Luca's birthday was the next day, and I said, "No, I don't think he was going to invite me to his birthday party anyway." Benny Smith liked that one. He laughed and kind of left it there.
The book is The Wonder Boy, so it's when I first heard you were writing the book, I was like, "Well, is it too soon? I mean, Luka hasn't got there yet. He's striving to get there." And then I'm reading it just after a couple chapters, and I'm thinking, my God, his rookie year could be a book. Like, oof. This is a way overdue book. Like, this is what you get, I guess, with a generational superstar. I'm sure you could have written books about Michael Jordan throughout his career and LeBron, mm-hmm. Like, same thing. Like, it's actually, this turns out to be the perfect time for this book, and it's fantastic. It's bringing me back. I mean, it's sad as well for us now that it's, I'm bringing back memories, but it also, in reading these memories, is illustrating how good he was. When you're talking about, like, they were counting on Willie Cauley-Stein at one point to be a player, like the cast around him that he's able to have done what he's done to this point.
Yeah. Look, has he won a championship? No. But how many guys in their early 20s are the best player on a championship team? I can think of one in recent NBA history, and it's a painful memory for Mavericks fans. I'll let you guys figure out who that was.
But of course, they had a very veteran still at his prime, Shaq, right?
Yeah,
that's what you're talking about. And a veteran still in his prime, Kareem was one before that. But
yes, with Magic, and you could argue, was Magic the best player? Whatever. Right. But yeah, like for Luka to be able to take one supporting cast, which we had, or the Mavericks rather had a co-star on that team. They just didn't realize it or acknowledge it or appreciate it in Jalen Brunson. But still, like, Luka was by far the best player on that team. Then, it was a collection of another very good player and a bunch of role players. Take that team to the Western Conference Finals, then a completely different supporting cast. Kyrie's obviously a legitimate co-star, but a superstar, a co-star, and a collection of role players to the finals at 25 and be a perennial MVP candidate, stack him up statistically. He's one of the best players we've ever seen to this point in his career. And you guys have read the book, so I think you understand the approach that I took. It's not like a traditional biography. And I made it very clear to the publishing company, like, I don't want to write a traditional biography. And I made it clear to Luka's people, like, look, I'm not delving into his personal life. Like, I'm not doing all that. This is a book about the business of basketball and the reality of the modern day NBA, of the pressure on a franchise when you draft a prodigy, written through the prism of Luka and the Mavericks. And let's be honest, there has been all kinds of drama, dysfunction, chaos, missteps from the Mavericks before they drafted Luka, leading right into his career and throughout the course of his tenure in Dallas. And I was talking to the general manager late last season, actually during the playoffs, and I'm talking to him about this book and about this pressure. And he's like, "Yeah, there's a pressure, but the other thing is, a talent like that gives you a lot of margin for error." And man, did the Mavericks use up that margin, like the KP trade, which was, we can talk about the results of it. At the time, how popular was that trade in Dallas, right? People were ecstatic. Oh my gosh, Dirk's handing the baton to not one, but two European superstars that the Mavericks can be able to build around for a decade plus to come. And it went flop for a variety of reasons. Bungling the Brunson situation, that was a catastrophic deal. Frankly, they lucked into being able to get Kyrie when his value was as deflated as it's ever been because of the controversy in Brooklyn. And then they lucked into the fact that there wasn't really a market for him in free agency, being able to keep him. And then for all the stuff that went wrong, all the turnover, all the, from the roster to the literally the ownership, the front office, the coaching staff, they were able to scramble and successfully build a contender around this guy. They gave up a lot to do it. They don't have 27 through 30 as far as control of their own first round draft capital. But if you've got Luka in uniform with a contending cast around him, that's fine. You can live with that. Then you decide months after this finals appearance that you're dumping Luka for a 3 to 4 year time frame. That you do the math, you're getting in that time when the credit card bills due. It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
Yeah, they're in a very, very difficult situation. And I want to talk about the process of writing the book a little bit too, but there were a few specific things in the book, one from the last chapter that I wanted to ask you about. Because you mentioned that this season, this most recent time when they faked a calf injury for him a little bit to let him get in shape, that he was at the facility with his own two performance experts because he no longer trusted the people that had come in to replace Casey Smith and the other trainers there.
Jeremy Holstoppel, yeah.
So he's off to the side and he's doing his own thing, and there's tension there because they, meaning Nico and Kidd, want him over with their guys. He wants to be with his guys. There's a lack of trust. The thing that I find interesting is I haven't heard a player say that they had a problem with that privately or publicly. And I'm not disputing your reporting at all, and I'm sure it pissed off Nico, and I'm sure it pissed off Kidd and on down the line. But to me, the level where friction becomes NBA level of do we have to do something about this is when the other players are kind of like, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
And I just never got any indication past, present, or his new team going forward that he was rubbing people the wrong way. And that's what's, I think, hard for a lot of people to stomach is like, yeah, he's a clown. He talks shit. I really wish he wouldn't. But as long as his teammates think he's locked in and on board, I think that it's on management at that point to kind of live with that. And I want to get into that part, but just wanted to bring up to you that it's odd that I haven't heard other teammates grumbling about this guy really ever.
Right. And you're talking about the time it was actually a wrist injury. And
wrist, okay.
To be clear, he had a wrist injury, but it was a minor wrist injury. And just like with the ankle, Jay Kidd and Nico's first year, there was an injury. And then the absence was extended to, give him time to get into shape, to shed weight, all those sorts of things. And, there would be times where they would be like, hey, Luka, we want you mentally engaged in practice. Be like, no, I'm going to work with my guys over here. And so, but again, as a source told me in that book, and the communication between Luka's body team, his personal employees and the Maverick staff was minimal this season and unproductive to say the least. But as a source told me, they're protecting the player that you alienated, right? And the firing of Casey Smith, which happened in August 2023, when it happened, I reported it and I didn't really dig into it because, there's there's times where you think there's going to be some real drama, but you kind of want to let the story unfold, right? And was I going to dig into it last year when they turned things around midseason? They go off on a finals run? No, but that was a big deal. Casey Smith is, 20 years here, right? Was maybe the most respected person in his field, was a massive part of Luka's cultural transition from a European teenager to not just America, but to the NBA, would visit Luka, every summer over there in Europe. Was part of the group that went over there when he signed his Supermax contract. Scott Tomlin, the longtime VP of Communications, another guy who was huge in Luca's cultural transition and inner circle. Those are probably the two people who spent the most time with him. Scott Tomlin left right after that to go be the executive director of the Dirk Nowitzki Foundation, and it was a domino effect. They fire Casey in frankly pretty cold and ruthless fashion, and I think I don't want to speak for Scooter, but I think that he'd had enough, and Dirk was like, "Come on, buddy," because I can just tell you, Dirk, Casey, and Scooter. When Dirk is sobbing after the '06 finals, it was those three people in the locker room until basically the sun came up the next morning. And then after this finals run, there was actually decent communication between Luca and his body team and like the Maverick strength and conditioning staff last year, because Jeremy Holsopple is another guy. He goes back to like the good Dirk years, and is a huge part of the group that brings Luca along. And like Jeremy and Luca's guys, Andrzej Masek, who came over from Slovenia, and Javi, I'm blanking on Javi's last name, who was with Real Madrid. Like Jeremy worked with those guys. Casey Spanger, the massage therapist, who's also part of the group of people who've been with Luca the whole time. There were good relationships. Those guys got fired after last season. And as Lucas, said to somebody that I talked to, they get rid of everybody that I like. And so that was going to kind of drive a wedge between Luca and the people who are getting rid of these dudes that he likes and respects. And he doesn't know Johan Billsborough, who's now running the Mavericks Health and Performance Group. He doesn't know Keith Belton, their strength coach. He doesn't trust them. They're Nico's guys who are replacing his guys. So all that, the fraying of the relationships was definitely a factor. And, then like, look, the conditioning concerns are legitimate. It's been an issue. And Luke, after he hurt his calf just before camp, like, I think he had a good time in Vegas and during the preseason. He came back out of shape and heavy and didn't play well early in the season, which Luca can go 29, 9-9 and not play well. It's really amazing. It's a testament to his talent. But if you watch, if you know Luca at his peak, and if you can see it. And that was certainly the feeling early in the season. And they shut him down, or he gets shut down. And then he came back and he did play well. He was full-blown Luca. They won 14-17. And then on Christmas, he goes down, and the reaction, certainly from Nico, was he was pissed. This is what happens when a guy doesn't take care of himself. This is what happens when a guy is not in shape. And I think that I maybe wasn't as aware as, I don't know if I should have been, but I wasn't as aware of just how much the frustration was, that it really had led to thoughts of trading him at the time. But that's what ended up happening. And again, I think it's all that frustration, but it's also the fraying of the relationships. And they felt like Luca was detached from the team. Like, is there some truth to that? Sure. Is there some fault from the front office? Certainly. And as far as his teammates, there are times where maybe Luca felt a little bit detached. But here's the thing: those dudes want to play with a perennial MVP candidate. Those dudes want to play with a guy capable of leading the team to the finals. And, frankly, his relationship with Kyrie was one of the great stories of last season. And that didn't dim at all this season. Kyrie and Luca were a happy couple. Klay Thompson came to Dallas in large part because he wanted to play with Luca, because he wanted to be spoon-fed about 10 butt-naked open threes per game. If you'd have told Klay Thompson, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I believe if you'd have told Klay Thompson, hey, Luca's getting traded midseason, he probably would have taken more money from the Lakers to go to LA. This wasn't a case where his teammates were felt like the guy's got to go. I can assure you of that.
And when you say fraying of relationships, it really hits hard because that's why ostensibly that Nico was hired as a relationship guy. He's a guy who has relationships. But then that's another thought about Nico is that when he was hired, Mark Cuban was basically the GM.
Yeah.
And even when Donnie Nelson was the GM, right? Mark Cuban was the GM. And
yes, Mark Cuban has run basketball operations for the 20 years or 20 whatever years that he had majority ownership.
So Nico was brought in to be, like Mark Cuban was the GM, but you had Donnie, you had Haralabob, you had, he took input from a lot of places. And I think that's what he planned Nico to be, one of the guys he would take input from. And then all of a sudden, Nico finds himself fully in charge of basketball operations. And that's how we get here, I think.
Yeah, and so Nico's challenge for the first, what is this year? Is this year 4 of Nico, I believe? Yes. So Nico's challenge for the first 2.5 years, or at least one of his challenges, was to be the loudest and last voice in Mark Cuban's ear, right? Because if you're the loudest and you're the last, and that was like Donnie got boxed out a lot, right? Donnie by multiple people over the course of a couple of decades. But so that was Nico's challenge, but he was never going to have final say. Technically, Dumont has final say, but Nico's done a hell of a job of managing up. And, the trades that he made last year, they worked, and that gave him a lot of credibility. And they were his trades, despite Cuban telling us at the time that he was keeping basketball control. I don't know if Cuban was completely full of shit or just trying to speak something into existence, but that was never going to be the case. It's not in the language of the contract. And, it just wasn't reality. Cuban was basically allowed to give input. And then I think Nico had a file cabinet that looked a lot like this, where, that he would put Cuban's input from that point on. And it was Nico's show. And again, Nico, he was brought in large part because he has so many strong relationships throughout the NBA with guys like Kyrie Irving, who he's known since he was a teenager, with guys like PJ Washington, who he's known since he was a teenager. And he saw more in PJ than PJ had shown throughout the course of his tenure with the Hornets. And that, in both those cases, those relationships were beneficial to the Mavericks. Another guy who he had a great relationship with, again, going back to this player's teenage years, was Anthony Davis. Kobe Bryant, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Nico and Kobe were pretty tight. Extremely tight. I don't know if
you've heard, but do you know about Matthew Stafford and Clayton Kershaw?
I've heard once or twice.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
I covered those guys in high school, actually, back in my Dallas Morning News days. I saw Kershaw at a Mavericks game, actually, I don't know, a month or so ago. And I'm like, dude, when guys that I covered have gray hair in their beard, how old does that make me? Anyways, guys that I covered in high school. Anyways, so Nico's relationship with Kobe is as tight as he's been with anybody. Second on that list is probably Anthony Davis. So the relationship, Nico's relationships absolutely played a factor in this. Not only the fraying of his relationship with Luka, but when he decided to trade for Luka, he pretty quickly zeroed in on one specific target. He didn't just want to trade Luka. He wanted to trade him for Anthony Davis to bring in another of Nico's guys.
And that brings us to a very comical part, I think, of the final chapter of your book, which is fantastic. The book is fantastic, The Wonder Boy. It's so good that I bought 2 of them because
oh, you're a sweetheart.
I found that I wasn't having time enough to actually read. Like, we knew you were going to come on the show, or no, it just went on sale, right? Like this week. So I bought it. I couldn't read it, and I had to get the audiobook. Yeah.
There you go.
Same.
And obviously there's a challenge here because when the trade was made, there were 8,000 copies already printed. Like this copy right here, well, it ends the last line of this book, right?
I want to transport to that universe.
Hold on. Yeah. The last line of this book in this bad boy is Luka saying, "This is the franchise that drafted me and they gave me the keys." I'm just glad I'm here in Dallas. It is a
Oh,
happy ending.
Dagger.
It's open-ended still, but it's a happy, upbeat ending. And so I actually looked today on at 12:34 a.m. on February 2nd, which would have been 1:34 a.m. Eastern where I was in Cleveland. So this is probably about an hour and 15 minutes after the trade. I'd already gotten a lot of reporting on whatever. I sent an email to a bunch of my book agent, a bunch of people from the publishing company, basically, hey, we need to have a Zoom meeting soon. We got to figure something out here. And so the people who got those copies, the first 8,000, with proof of purchase, they can download the final chapter. It'll be a PDF, but hopefully it's in the audiobook at this point. It is on the, you guys read it obviously on the ebooks, and then the rest of the books will have it. But also, I was a little bit busy during the 2 weeks that I had to cover or to write that final chapter. My day job was pretty demanding at that time, so I would say that was definitely professionally the most intense 2 weeks of my life.
So
Yeah,
I want to get.
it's. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I just said I want to get back to that comical part, but
Oh yeah,
I,
yeah.
I
Go
did.
for it.
I did
My
wonder. I did wonder though to interrupt myself. Like this is actually great for this book, right? As far as
You know
book
what?
sales for Tim McMahon.
And like, I want to be sensitive to the feelings of an outraged fan base, even the people who say mean and nasty things about me. And so I don't want to sit here and be like, dude, this is awesome. Because that would, that's just I don't want to go there. What I will say is it's an insane story. It's an unbelievable plot twist. Certainly, the book now covers from the lead up to Luka's tenure in Dallas until the bitter end. And purely from a blunt business perspective, it's not difficult for me right now to generate publicity around this book. And the Lakers fan base being a natural target audience,
Yes,
there's a lot of
it's
fans.
great. It's the CEO.
Yeah.
The CEO of Zoom would have to admit the pandemic wasn't bad for everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good comparison.
just make sure you remember your point, Dan. But I just want to,
I will.
because people will say that to us, like, "Oh, your numbers must be up because of the Luka thing," and yours is a little bit different because you cover and have before multiple teams.
Right.
But I do think you're going to be spending a lot more time in Houston and in Oklahoma City over the next decade.
Well,
than
and you know what?
otherwise.
That honestly has always been funny. You're trying to run Luke out of town. Like, people have been saying that to me for years, and I'm like,
I don't want to be at home.
I'm an
Like-
NBA reporter based in Dallas. You don't think having one of the best players of all time in my backyard is probably a good thing for me professionally? By the way, you don't think having home playoff games is pretty cool? Because guess what I'll be doing now? I'll be covering 4 rounds of nothing but road games for me. I got a life and a wife and kids like that I enjoy seeing, I enjoy hanging out with. So yeah, like, you wanted to run Luke out of town from a selfish perspective. It's one of the stupidest things anybody's ever accused me of.
So back to, you were talking about that he focused just on Anthony Davis. And so I said that was my comical part of the last chapter, is just where just the whole thought in my head of Rob Pelinka trying to keep a straight face when Nico first brought up Luka. Because I'm watching it now play out when I see Jeannie Buss interviewed here and there and try to say, no. I mean, we gave up a lot. It's incredible that Anthony Davis can be an afterthought, but he is, because it's not even comparable. It's like we've been trying to figure out the comp in the NFL.
No, I thought you guys nailed it.
Kelsey for Mahomes, or is it?
Well, I like the Myles Garrett Mahomes thing.
Okay.
I thought that, but I think you would have to, and we'll see, even if you take a few years off of the speedometer on Mahomes, though. I thought that was an apt comparison. It's a quarterback for a great pass rusher, both extremely valuable, but the quarterback's the most valuable position in the NFL.
By
the
far,
offensive engine is the most valuable commodity in the NBA. So I thought you guys I thought that was an apt comparison there. And you think this is good for book sales. Well, how much business has Ascension Coffee done? Since this trade and since
Yeah,
the
I
story that
mean,
Ramon and I wrote.
put
Um,
the second X down.
yeah, but and so I obviously have talked to what the other thing, honestly, that this was great for me, selfishly, was networking in the NBA. Because I can't tell you how many people that I try to get a hold of a lot of time are reaching out to me, talking general managers, executives, all these kind of people. And I have talked to dozens of them, probably, 50 or more, scouts, executives, GMs, those type of people. I have not had one, literally not one from another team say this was a good move for the Dallas Mavericks. There have been two camps. I would say the majority opinion has been you just cannot trade that sort of generational talent at that age unless he's got the proverbial gun to your head, which wasn't the case here. Luka was literally in the process of closing on his forever home. He couldn't wait to put pen to paper on that Supermax contract this summer. Um, Things weren't all honky dory all around, but he definitely was planning on being in Dallas for the long haul. So there's one camp, you just can't trade that guy, period. There were some who said, look, because the intel on Luca, all the stuff people want to hear about that I've reported on throughout his course career, it is what it is. So there were some that said, I can understand wanting to get out of the Luca business, but you have got to maximize your return. And the way that Nico went about it, by his own, not only admission, but I'm almost proud of how secretive they were able to keep this. You can't maximize the return if there's only one bidder. Now, he did make very kind of cursory contact with the Wolves and with the Bucks, but it was like, hey, could you ever imagine doing a star for star type of deal? Oh no, okay, all right, cool. Um, they only negotiated with one team, and Palinka was able to convince Nico, hey, if I can't reach out to Bill Duffy and kind of gauge Luca's interest on the long term with the Lakers, I can't give you everything I got.
Dude, that's what I'm so incensed by all that. And I highlighted that part where you wrote Palinka had leverage due to the secretive nature of the discussions. He did not, because you had Luka. You always had all the leverage. I'm pretty sure Palinka would have given up Austin Reeves and Connect and who, like, in the end, and the picks to say, you know what? Because moving forward, I'm going to have Luka for the next decade. Yeah, but you can't talk to his agent. You know what? I'm going to take that risk because we're the Lakers. Like, he would have, in the end, said yes to whatever you said because you are the ones that were giving him Luka.
Nico did not exactly ship him to Siberia. Now, Luka was emotionally devastated in the immediate aftermath of the trade, but I just came from LA, just saw him play, and I'm telling you, Luka's got his joy back. And playing for JJ Redick has been great for him. They were buddies during JJ's brief time here, stayed friends. Now they're transitioning the coach player dynamic, but that's going off well. He's back with Dodo. LeBron's the guy he idolized growing up. And the Lakers are a damn good team. I think they're one piece away. I think they're that rim running big man away. Like, we all understand how important that is to Luka, how if you give him that, and he's maximizing Jackson Hayes. I mean, Jackson Hayes looks like a functional starting center right now. Wait until they get a guy who's going to be at that level. And by the way, they were so nailed down to those picks, to the swap and the pick and Dalton Connect, that they quickly threw it to Charlotte for and they had buyer's remorse on Mark Williams after the physical and took it back. But like, those picks and that player should have been part of the deal if you're going to make the deal in the first place. And the other thing, so there's the conditioning concerns which lead to not just the fear, but Nico believes this guy's body's going to break down on him during what should be his prime. That's just, that's the fact of the matter. Now, so that leads to this feeling of we cannot give this guy a supermax. I mean, Jesus Christ, biggest contract in NBA history. That's going to be a bad investment. I think that is really backwards thinking. And I can tell you, I've talked to the nerds who crunch the numbers, in the analytics departments of multiple front offices. And the consensus that I've gotten is there are 4 players who are not only worth supermax extensions, but just based on their production, probably $100 million values. Shea, Giannis, Joker, Luka. So just from the production standpoint, Luka on a supermax is still a bargain. Okay, what if he gets hurt? Well, Kevin Durant in his 30s had a torn Achilles and missed a bunch of games to the Brooklyn Nets for other injuries. And they were still able to get 2 really good young players and a massive picks package in return for him. I don't care what injury history Luka Doncic has. If he is locked in, let's say there's a player option on Supermax, which he probably would have gotten this last deal. If he's locked up for 4 years, doesn't matter where he wants to go, where Bill Duffy wants to go. You can open it up to the highest bidder at that point. Now, you can't trade him now. You got to Supermax him this summer. I don't know. Maybe you go back to the finals this year, maybe not. Then it's a 1-year commitment. You can't trade him that next year off an extension. Maybe you go back to the finals, maybe you don't. Who knows? So you got to live with him for a year and a half. Okay. If you still feel this way in a year and a half, you could have gotten a bullhorn and announced to the NBA after the season, we are trading Luka Doncic, and created the highest bidding war in NBA history. They didn't do that. They wanted Anthony Davis. They wanted to get rid of Luka right now. And, look, the Mavericks, had they stayed healthy, and maybe that's a different book. But they were going to be really good. They were going to be at least a threat in the Western Conference with this group. But again, you gave up a decade or more of one of the greatest talents in the history of the league for, by Nico Harrison's own words, a 3 to 4 year time frame. And now, unfortunately, year 1 of that time frame is kaput, and year 2 is in serious jeopardy, because we don't know when Kyrie is going to be able to come back from the torn ACL, or if he's going to be able to come back at right away, or soon enough for the playoffs next season, the full productive version of Kyrie.
Yeah, you bring up there, it's very complicated, the assessment. I do believe that Nico actually thought he's going to break down. I do believe he thought as he breaks down, he's going to break down at a more precipitous rate than a normal player because of this and that attribute. I also think that any of us, when we're making professional judgments at times, whether we like the person or not, changes whether we're positive or negative about our projections of their trajectory. And so to me, when you describe that scenario where they would have had another year or 2 years, I just think a lot of times time helps situations like that.
Yeah.
And, I'm not expecting you to comment on this, but it's frustrating to me because it does feel like at some point, Nico just kind of took, I can, in my hot takey way, say like the coward's route of, I feel like you got to go to the man. And even if you need an intermediary, you just got to go to the man and say, hey, look, and maybe you're going to have to deal with some stuff you don't like, but that's what's best for the basketball team. And I think it's complicated by the fact that Luka's Luka and he's European, because he doesn't have people telling you like, hey, here's what we kind of would have preferred from Nico, like our side of the,
Well,
or maybe he does, but it's a little different.
Luka's, he's got
People.
He's got people.
Okay.
And there were discussions, and look, there are 2 drastically different sides
Sure.
to that story, right? Even as recently as the road trip when Luka got traded midway through, the Mavericks wanted him on the road trip, and Luka and his people were like, no, we're not going on the road trip. Like, we're working here. Like, we've got practice facility whenever we need it. We've got all the like all the medical stuff in the practice facility. Like, why would we go on the road where we're in planes? We can barely get gym time. Like, you gotta kind of have a makeshift operation. But the Mavericks took that as like, he's defiant. So
yeah,
they're like Luka's, like Bill Duffy, for example, Bill Duffy is one of the best agents in the NBA and has had a ton of high profile clients, including Steve Nash, which was an interesting kind of and Rajon Rondo for that matter, and Darren Collison. He had an interesting history with the Mavericks even before Luka. But it just the especially the medical stuff. Luka's body team and the Mavericks knew people running the medical and strength and conditioning side. That there was really a communication breakdown. But again, you got rid of the people who Luka liked, respected, and perhaps most importantly, trusted. So,
Well, I think for a lot of Mavs fans, it's still maybe too fresh. But I'm so glad this book exists. It's a phenomenal read about a very interesting guy and going back to his days in junior high. It's just I probably wouldn't have read it this quick if we weren't in this job, but I found myself, as lame as this is, being like, I'm happy this exists so I can tell people who didn't get to see Luca in Dallas, like my son,
mm.
like, hey, this is what it was like, man. It was like nothing you'd ever experienced in Dallas before when that guy was hot. So I'm glad it exists, and I'm a Mavs fan who's not mad at you.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I always remind myself the maddest people online, they're loud and you see that if you wade in your mentions and all that. But that's, they're the loud minority, and I get it. Um, and I get like my style's not for everybody. Sometimes facts hurt feelings, whatever. That, it is what it is.
There he is.
But like there's this perception that like I decided to write this book after the trade to capitalize on it. Like
Prolific, folks.
Great job.
I was like, I appreciate that you think I'm talented enough to turn around 120,000 words in a span of weeks, but trust me, I'm not. Actually, the timing, it was an amazing coincidence. This was originally planned to publish in March of last year. And there was a change at the publishing company. The guy who's my editor, who had done like Chris Herring's book on the Knicks and Windhorse book on the books on LeBron. Like this guy was like, is actually Sean Desmond's his name. He's actually a Dallas native. He left the publishing company to go elsewhere. And so they brought somebody else in and they're like, let's push it back. And they were like, instead of filing your copy at the end of September, file it to us in December. I'm like, it's like writing a game story midway through the second quarter. I can't do that. So we pushed it back a whole year. And listen, thank goodness for that. Not just because of the way the timing worked out, but can you imagine if the ending of this book was the gloom and the doom and the fear of, man, if you guys don't get this ship turned back around, Luka might be asking out soon. And then the book comes out. Oh, the Mavericks have the best record in the NBA in the final quarter of the regular season, and off they go on a finals run.
Oh yeah, your mentions would have been great then.
It would have been tough, but that it really does just kind of illustrate just the wild roller coaster ride it's been in terms of trying to put together a contender around this guy, and then you succeeded and dumped him. It's I as I was writing this book for a while, really until about March of last season, I thought it might end in a Luka trade. I just never, ever imagined it would be because the Mavericks decided they didn't want to move on with him. And I do want to make clear, and there's a chapter in there on the Slovenian national team. And the reason I thought that was important to include is because I think his commitment to the Slovenian national team and the fact he plays for them when he could have hopped on the bandwagon with Spain or even Serbia, I think that really kind of shows you that Luka Doncic's natural inclination is to lean towards loyalty. You can talk, I've talked about his flaws as much as anybody. I cannot sit here and tell you that, he's a disloyal person. Naturally, he's an extraordinarily loyal person to the people who he trusts and loves. And that's illustrated by the fact that not only does he play for Slovenia, but he plays every single game, every single summer, without question. If he can walk, he can play, even if he's just gone on a finals run and had to take injections to play in the finals games, and it's a couple weeks later.
So, of course, we read this book after the trade. Did you go back and change any of the first chapters? Just because while reading those beginning chapters, it's like you'll have something in there about Anthony Davis or about his conditioning. And I'm like, oh, is that because? Yeah.
No, I didn't. I didn't change a word. And like I said, there were 8,000 copies printed. So,
oh, yeah, we can prove it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to double check me on that, take one of the early copies and compare it to,
You want me to buy a third book?
Jesus, Tim.
Buy them all, baby.
I gotta
Buy 'em
feed
all.
my family.
Hey, you've got friends, you got families, you got great gifts. Father's Day is coming up. No, anyways, but no, I didn't change a word. And honestly, the one thing I would have changed, I'll go back to this last chapter. And I know it's pouring salt in wounds, but in one of the second to last paragraph, it ends with, but in a league that changes swiftly, the Mavs managed to earn the most trusted commodity, stability with a superstar. I would have added, or so it seemed. That's the one thing I would have changed. But it wasn't comfortable writing. And I think the vast majority of the book, I believe, does illustrate just what an incredible talent this guy is, right? And that's the reason there's the interest. That's the primary reason that the book is even a possibility. But I did address the flaws, the petulance, the ranting at referees, and the conditioning. I addressed that stuff throughout the course of the book because it is part of the story. And I'm very happy that I did, simply because I would have looked like a fool if it's just, daffodils and sunshine for 18 chapters and then, oh, plot twist, by the way, all this stuff has been building up. You know what I mean? So it's not comfortable, especially, as I'm writing this book, I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to be covering Luka in Dallas in my backyard moving forward. And, obviously we'd had our times where we pushed back. I would say, certainly over the last year since the Devin Booker fan thing, we had a brief chit chat after that. And I would say that we had a cordial professional relationship from that point moving forward. Again, he wasn't inviting me out to Nick and Sam's for dinner. If I want one of those 77-ounce Luka steaks, I got to buy it myself. But it was cordial. But again, it wasn't comfortable, but my thing is it fair? Is it accurate? Is everything in the proper context? And if I feel like I can answer yes on all three of those, then is it comfortable is not important.
A little false advertising on the book. It says, as read by Tim MacMahon.
First chapter is.
Okay, that's right. Then they switched to some other guy.
Well, here's the deal. I would have loved to have done the entire thing, although certainly I had concerns about pronouncing some of those European cities and names and whatnot. But they're like, yeah, we just need like 6 days of your time in the middle of the NBA season. No, I can't.
Difficult to come by.
My bosses at ESPN were extremely gracious in allowing me to do this, and basically in kind of from mid-July until training camp, really over the last 3 years, not putting a lot on my plate during those times, right? Because that's when all the work on the book was basically done. You're doing reporting and interviews throughout the season anyways, but that's when the writing and the trip to Slovenia and Germany with the Slovenian national team were done. I can't take 6 days off in the middle of a freaking NBA season to go into a studio and mutter my way through some difficult pronunciation. So we turned it over to a professional after the first chapter.
See, I thought that I didn't know, it was only chapter 2, but chapter 2 is now kind of going into when he's in Europe. And I thought, they got a European guy for the same reason that you're saying, pronouncing European names. And I thought this would be like Castaway, the movie, when you go to the island, there's no music until he gets back off the island. I don't know if you knew that. Or like The Matrix, there's this green hue if you're not in the real world.
What's Sean Marion got to do this?
So I thought it would go back to Tim MacMahon. But then I thought, okay, it's because this guy can pronounce all these names. So I just wanted to illustrate to you some things he can't pronounce. Here we go.
During a second quarter timeout, standing in front of the full-figured male dance squad, known as the Mavs Manny AACs.
Okay, so that's one. That's how he pronounced the Mavs Maniacs.
Maybe a rebrand.
He did pronounce all these.
The mini AACs. Those are like the little models.
What is this, an AAC for ants?
This one stood out because this is a European player.
Uh-oh.
As the Mavs were playing the Nuggets in Dallas, news broke that Utah Jazz center Rudy Gobert had tested positive for COVID-19.
So I thought, okay. Well, maybe this guy isn't a sports fan. And then I found out he's definitely not a sports fan with this.
Carlisle attempted to ease the pressure for Porzingis. Not an easy task for a 7'3" man named Unicorn who had a freshly inked max contract, by noting that Celtics forward Gordon Hayward needed a full season.
So there you go. Just a couple of little verbal typos from the not Tim McMahon, reading Tim McMahon's book.
Hard copy's the way to go.
The hard copy, I'm a hard copy guy, but that's not available now. That's just pre-sale, yeah. And we were having you on Friday. So
I would have loved to have done the audiobook myself, but
it's nice to hear no, but I love you on the show, or the Hoop Collective, and you're a familiar voice, and I really liked the first chapter. I thought you did a great job, and I do want to know, even just that, how long does that take? And do you read like a little bit one day and a little bit the next day, or do you read the whole thing?
Actually, they gave me, they're like, I forgot, I think it was like a 4-hour block. And it took me about 2.5 to because you're like reading, and then you may, if you stumble or whatever, you go back. And so it took me like 2.5. I don't know, maybe I could have powered through the thing in less than 6 days. But again, I couldn't ask my bosses, like, dude, can you give me several days off in the middle of the season?
Oh, no, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, God, I wish you wouldn't have. Thanks for clipping those for me.
Oh, now you didn't even know it.
Hey, listen, you knew where you were on today. You knew he was going to happen.
Yeah, no,
he also
had get through this thing unscathed. That's for sure.
He had a little spicy twist on Rajon Rondo.
Oh, the funny thing is, that is the most mispronounced name in NBA history, probably.
I could see that.
Because everybody says
Rajon
or Rajon, to the point where when the Mavericks acquired him in that trade that certainly went well here, after his like introductory press conference, I pulled him off the side. I said, "Hey, man, I hear your name pronounced two very different ways. What is the correct, like, I'm sorry to ask, but like, what's the correct way to pronounce your first name?" And he was like, "It's Rajon, and I actually really appreciate you asking me that."
There you go.
Rajon Rondo. Now, there were other questions that I asked him that he did not appreciate nearly as much during the course of his time in Dallas and after. That was an interesting time. Again, a Bill Duffy client.
A fun decade or so we've had here.
The book is great, though, man. Yeah, it's wonderful. I think everybody will.
I really appreciate you guys. I really appreciate you guys saying that. And it's funny because, like, it's probably going to get hammered in, like, the online reviews, but it'll get hammered by people who don't read it. And I hope the people who read it generally have the same reaction as you guys do.
Well, thanks, pal.
Well, thanks for your time, man. The road.
Wish we could do this more often, fellas, but again, I'm at the mercy of my wonderful bosses at ESPN, but I really, truly do appreciate you guys having me. And adios, amigos.
Adios, amigo. The great Tim McMahon.